Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Gran Touring Series Racing League Season 39 EU Division 3. It's round one, and we once again head out onto the tarmac that is the Yamagiri Bavarian of Kyoto Driving Park for the final time in this season in the Austrian machines, the Crossbows, and we are going to be taking a look at the lower split within the EU divisions. I'm your host, Paul TX141 Walsh, also known as Britain a Spit, depending on what media you follow me on, and it's good to be here at the Japanese fictional circuit. Looking forward to plenty of frantic action. If round one for EU Division 2 was anything to go by, then we're expecting even more frantic fighting over the course of tonight's 3 races, and indeed we have a qualifying session before that. Now, for those wondering, what time do we kick off? We are expected to kick off with qualifying in the region of half an hour from now. And of course, in the meantime, we will have some stock checks. We'll be able to introduce the drivers to you. And after we've got qualifying out of the way, i.e. the 12-minute session, we've then got 3 races. We are going to have 2 sprint races consisting of 5 laps each. And then we have the feature length race of 11 laps with that all-important mandatory pit stop. Now, the lobby is looking a little bit sparse at the moment. We are expecting a number of 12 drivers to arrive tonight at trackside. We do already have 6 of them here, albeit they're just getting themselves finalised and set. But we will be expecting double that number before we get things underway. And as I say, start checks should be kicking off within the next 14 minutes and qualifying a further 15 minutes after that. So at the hour, 8 o'clock our time, but indeed different times depending on where you're based in the world, we should be seeing qualifying kick off. As we say hello to those of you tuning in so far, including, of course, the legendary Pingo Phone from Austria who raced in EU Division 2 last night. We hope you're all doing well and you've had a good first half to your week, getting over the hump day today, and then it is all uphill from here in terms of Thursday, Friday, and then we've got that weekend. But enough nattering, let's start to introduce our drivers and then talk a little bit about the circuit and the machinery we're racing in. So again, we've got a small number here. We are going to try and start from the top, but there may be some significant gaps in terms of who we're introducing here. And immediately we are going to be skipping over team at number 1, the fact that neither driver is currently present. We've got a lot of new names as well tonight, newcomers to GTSRL. So we have really got a eclectic mix of some more experienced drivers within the racing community and some newcomers who, whilst they'll be experienced in GT Sport, won't have raced as part of this championship or indeed this type of season before. And it's a fresh set of faces to go with it. So we start off then by introducing one of our 2 Team 2 drivers, and that is the Mexican driver here of Supremo T-Gon 5, but I'm going to be referring to as Supremo T from this point onwards. Making his way onto another lap right now, the Mexican driver forming the lead driver of team number 2, and he will be joined by Blaze GD a little bit later on. We're expecting Blaze to arrive. We wish Supremo all the best luck, of course, in his debut tonight as he makes his way up the hill now to complete Sector 1 and head into Sector 2, going very sideways there out of turn number 5. Our next driver who we're going to be introducing will be one of the Team 4 drivers. In fact, we've got both of the Team 4 drivers here, which is fantastic news. We start off then with the number 2 driver of Team number 4, and that is Heedless, the Scotsman, making his way right now through turn number 6. Heedless side A's as he goes through the corner, flashing his lights as well. He definitely knows he's got the camera looking at him right at this point in time. And Heedless, you'll remember, was in season 38, racing in the Peugeot RCZ GT3, and it was very memorable for a number of reasons, but most importantly that he took one of the most undervalued Group 3 cars and made it work in EU Division 3 and picked up some solid points. And Heedless is one of those drivers, he may not be the fastest, but he's always willing to give it his best and give it a good shot, and a really good attitude hopefully will be rewarded tonight with some solid points. His teammate Spinky Biltong is in the lobby right now, but just not going out into circuit, still tucked away in the garage. So we are expecting his teammate Spinky to be coming out on circuit shortly. You've then got to go over to team number 5, and we have the combination of Insubordinate 73, the American racing under the German flag, based on his country of residence right now, but he is an American and we'll be referring to him as that for the rest of this evening. Insubordinate being a familiar face now within EU Division 3, based on last season, of course, in season 38, but Insubordinate being a very consistent driver, albeit sometimes finding himself on the receiving end of some incidents that were not necessarily his fault, or some minor mistakes, but he's come come back refreshed and reinvigorated for season 39, and we look forward to seeing what the American is able to achieve. And he is joined by a driver who is new to the GTSRL EU community, and that is the Irishman of Phil Deadly. Phil being spelled P-H-E-E-L there, Mr. Deadly, making his way up towards the start-finish line to go on to another practice lap in the orange KTM machine there. And the Irishman, again, a new face here, so we're looking forward to what we can expect from Phil as he goes into turn 1. And he was finding in the practice prior to tonight that he was a little bit off the pace, and he was asking for some of the more veteran experienced drivers for some advice on potential lines and also just tips on getting into the swing of things, and everybody has come together to try and help him out, and he's been able to start getting his lap times down. You can see 150.2 being his fastest lap, and Phil just getting himself clocked in right now, albeit he'll want to avoid clattering the left-hand exit barrier out of turn 5 in the race and qualifying. Our last two drivers to introduce, well, one of them you'll be very familiar with, and that is the Egyptian driver of Tamer 2010, racing under the Saudi Arabian flag, of course, due to personal circumstances and the fact that Egypt is not recognised as a participating country by the FIA joint collaboration with GT Sport right now, but still that's not against anything political per se, that's just how it is. So we will be referring to Tamer as Egyptian from this point onwards, despite the flag differential here. But Tamer finding his way into GTSRL all the way back in season 37 if we remember correctly, and finding himself in season 37 towards the rear of the pack typically in EU Division 3, but then in season 38 he was able to start gaining a little bit more time and actually picked up some results that weren't necessarily him finishing right at the back. He actually picked up, I believe, a P10 in race number 3 of round number 3, for example, in season 38. Being consistent, albeit some mistakes do creep in, and I think there's a little bit of nervousness as well with Tamer. He sometimes feels that because he's a bit slower than everyone else that he's not doing his best, but he's giving it his best shot. I can definitely tell him that, and it's good to see him out on circuit once again, and we're hopeful, of course, that this time he'll come with a little bit more pace and be a little bit closer to the midfield in EU Division 3. But that's all of our drivers who have been introduced so far, as we say hello to MDC3755, also known as Mike, in the Twitch chat as well. And we are really waiting now for additional drivers to arrive. As I say, it is a little bit of a sparse grid right now. We've only got 5 drivers out on the circuit getting some practice time in, but we are expecting more drivers to arrive in short order. I'm just going to be checking in with the stewards right now to see as to what is happening. And I believe we have got Hellcat, one of the other drivers, on his way right now, albeit he's not able to get in immediately. He's waiting to be able to join in as Pies needs to accept his friend request, and I'm actually going to give Pies a quick reminder to do so. So give us 2 seconds here, folks. I'm sure Pies has already done this, but I'm just giving this in case he's not seen it. But whilst we do have a couple of minutes to go and we haven't really got the opportunity to introduce anyone, how does it sound if we went out on track instead? So we are just going to make sure that we don't interrupt any drivers. We've got a driver coming along the start-finish straight right now, and then we can creep along. So I'm going to be doing this on PS4 controller rather than steering wheel and pedals, so this is going to be a bit different and very inconsistent. But you can see here the KTM being the Austrian machine made by the motorcycle manufacturer, in fact, KTM, typically known for their motorcycles. The company originating from the, I believe it's the, well, I'm trying to think how to say the name right now, but originating in 1934 and essentially coming out of central Austria. And the Crossbow, the 2012 variant here, we're seeing having a manual 6-speed gearbox rather than the alternative gearbox where you can get the the semi-automatic gearbox, which is the up-down shifter effectively. So we make our way out of turn 6, now come down the hill through turn 7 and up into 8. And we are running this kart with quite a light amount of horsepower. We're running it with approximately, if I remember correctly, is about 93% power, and we've reduced the rate even more so. As we say hello to Jerry Race Car Driver in the chat. And we're just right now making our way around the circuit. Give an idea of what it's like riding on board one of these. For what you can see, whilst we are waiting for some more drivers to join right now, is that with the manual gearbox, you do have this idea of sometimes it's better not to downshift all the way because you lose time by going through the upshift moment. As we make our way through the very difficult turn 14 there and balance it on the power very gently. Now come up into 15, the final corner. The third of a triplet of hairpins around this circuit, effectively the medium speed one here. And we're going to go for another lap. Let's go for a faster one. Our drivers will be revving this thing out. Its peak power is at 6,500 RPM, albeit you can rev it up to 7,000 as timer comes out, and we are going to back off completely. You can see the whole concept of turn 1 is just balancing it on the throttle as you get on that exit, so that way you can go up the hill. And running behind a driver here, this gives you a feel for what it's like running behind somebody when you're in those race conditions. You can see the little bits of understeer that are getting invoked, so we just lift off the throttle there as Tamo claps the wall. Now we come down to turn 6. Tamo there burning his penalty on the braking zone. He won't be allowed to do that in the actual races. He'll be asked to burn that penalty effectively just before the start-finish straight. That's the only penalty burning zone we have. Now we come rip-roaring down the hill here. Bit too much speed that time, in fact, and we're going to do a little bit of rallycross. But I'm seeing we are experiencing some issues with regards to individuals being able to find the lobby, so I'm just going to help players out with that right now. Give me 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. So we've got Hellcat here now, and in fact let's take a moment to introduce Hellcat. Some of you will not remember Hellcat, but I definitely do. Now Hellcat, our British driver here, making his way up towards turn 1. I think just trying to get a feel for what the car's going to be like going into the corner, or messing about a little bit on the throttle there in fact. And give me 2 seconds folks, I'm just helping out another one of the drivers get in. But Hellcat, you will have seen him all the way back in season 36, which I believe was the final season we had at the end of 20... What year are we in now? At the end of 2020. And that was the season where we raced in at Group Season. Hellcat was the only driver to bring the Nissan R92 CP. Didn't have the best of experiences, unfortunately. Found himself quite a way down the field, did the British driver, but he gave it his all nonetheless, and he's back tonight to take part once again. And Hellcat, for reference, is the second driver of team number 3. And with Hellcat being introduced, we now have Spinky Biltong, who's making his way... Oh, goodness me, pressed the wrong button there. Again, my button presses wrong. Spinky Biltong, the British driver, the lead driver, I should point out, for team number 4, and he is partnered up with the Scotsman of Heedless. And Spinky, we have seen plenty of over the last couple of seasons, putting in a very solid set of performances last season in season 38 with the Group 3 cars, and we look forward to seeing what he and the Scotsman alongside him can do as a team tonight. Should be a very strong team. As he makes his way out of the pits and out onto circuit. Spinky going a little bit deep there with the Vodafone livery as Hellcat tries to follow him through and goes to the inside instead. And that's something we saw multiple times in the races last night, was the fact that effectively there are multiple lines through the sweeper corners, the sweeping left-handers here, by turn 1 and turn 6, and it's all about balancing that throttle, as Spinky definitely gets it quite a bit wrong there. and decides instead to pay a visit to the exit wall at turn 4 as Tamer comes charging through, and actually starting to build up quite a bit of a momentum is the Egyptian, making his way up the hill and now down into turn 6. And it's all about getting that timing on the circuit with these cars. We've got a very light car here, and as a result of that, it's going to be all about building up that confidence over time. And just to clarify, folks, when I was trying to figure out which part of Austria that KTM originated from, well, their headquarters are currently based at what I believe it is called Mattighofen in Upper Austria. But they are typically known for their off-road motorcycles rather than their cars such as the ones you're seeing here. This is a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car as well, so we do have that overall aim to try and slide the car through the corners. We are having some issues in getting a couple of drivers into lobby right now, as I should actually remove myself from being readied up because I will not be racing. Well, at least not until King of the Karts. But right now we are missing a sizable chunk of our field, albeit we're hopeful we'll still be able to get underway. But things may be a little bit delayed at this point, because normally we'd be getting start checks underway right now, but due to the fact we've only got 7 drivers here, it's going to take a little bit longer because we seem to have a lot of individuals who are missing right now. But in the meantime, whilst we are waiting, I think we're just going to stay with Supremo T here as he makes his way towards the start-finish line to commence another lap. And in fact, we are going to hop on board with the Mexican driver as he goes over to the left-hand side and starts to instead put on the brakes. So we're not going to be riding on board with him for a lap. Instead, we are going to hop around and find somebody else to get a reference to that from, who's putting a lot more practice than myself here. I think we are going to ride on board with Heedless. He's just letting his teammate through there, Spinky being let through, although Spinky I believe is on auto drive, so this is going to get a little bit black and white in terms of the situation. But here we go then, we're going to ride on board with Heedless as he flashes his teammate to say all is good, and he's going to take us round on a lap. Coming out the final corner then, taking a late apex there, he's on low fuel right now, you can see he's only got 25% fuel, so this is not going to be indicative of most likely what he's going to be able to achieve in qualifying unless he goes for complete fuel burning and then only does one fast lap. But across the timing line he comes to start lap, and you can see he's going to brake in nice and late into turn 1, and in fact he goes to the high to inside line there, from the outside to inside as late as possible on the brakes, and then tries to get on the power as early as possible to turn the car through, and nicely done there to get a good run out of turn 1. Now the uphill segment, he's going to need to be careful, he's going to carry a lot of speed into turn 3, he nails that very nicely. Turn 4 does the same, and now goes charging over the curve at turn 5, just clipping the curve and letting it rotate him a little bit, and now across the timeline a 10th.5 faster than the best practice time so far set by Supremo T, and now coming into turn number 6. And as he makes his way through turn number 6, what you can see, getting it nicely nailed there, and coming down the hill now through turn 5 and into turn number 8. The triple chicane awaits the British driver there as he makes his way into the corner and getting on those brakes, coming down the gears nice and gently, in fact, and staying in 4th gear, but just sideways across the exit of turn number 8 there. But he got it controlled, lost about a mile an hour as a result of going a little bit sideways, but it all plays out nicely as he makes his way through 11 and now up into the braking zone for 12 he goes. The very slow hairpin here, the slowest corner on the circuit. Going a bit too deep is Heedless as he makes his way out the corner now. He'll want to tighten that apex next time. That's going to have cost him about 2/10 of a second, although he has improved considerably there. So I think a lot of drivers really struggling with that hairpin. Making his way through 13 and 14 now. Drifting it through 14 and almost losing it there, but just about catching the car, and now coming down into 15 and making his way in here and actually getting it very odd line there, going for a very deep line, essentially trying to turn it from a symmetrical hairpin into a rather late apex hairpin by going as deep as possible and making the turning very sharp, and now charging down towards the start finish line. I think this is going to be a 48.6, and it's not quite enough to pip Supremo T's overall time so far, but you can see the difference there. It was essentially a case that Heedless losing the time on the final corner. If he can nail that line and turn it into a more symmetrical hairpin, he's definitely going to be in contention. And also we've got the question of fuel, of course. But now making his way up the hill right now. And we can see there that some more of our drivers now coming in. As Pies not too happy with one of our drivers by the looks of things, as we continue on all the same and we hop away from Heedless. Got any other drivers to introduce right now? Well, not at this very moment, although we do see that we have had one driver join, and that is the driver of Lewis No Regrets TBT, who we're going to be referring to as Lewis from this point onwards. The Portuguese driver here just parked up in the paddock right now, in fact making his way out to get a little bit of a warm up in before we get underway with potential start checks. And he is the lead driver of team number 1, and he will be joined by Mizuj, who we are hoping is going to be arriving at some point tonight. But focusing on Lewis here, a newcomer within the GTSRL community, and we look forward to seeing what he is able to achieve tonight. He has had some connectivity issues, that's why we haven't seen him join until now, but we are hopeful that those connectivity issues have been put aside, and we look forward to seeing what he is able to achieve out on the circuit. Tipped to be one of the faster drivers in this season's EU Division 3, and we are hoping that the Portuguese driver is able to show that immediately tonight. And thank you for confirming, MDC. So Zuj and Brownie will not be joining us tonight, so we're expecting to have a field of 10 drivers, albeit we are at the moment, I believe, still missing 2 of them. So we're still waiting for Blaze and also Maggle, who they both should be joining in short order. In fact, we are going to be getting underway with the start checks then, so I think we are going to be proceeding with 8 drivers, given the amount of time remaining. Here comes the first start check, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if everybody's able to get away A-OK. So as we pan down to the grid then, for the purposes of this start check, it'll be Supremo T, who starts on pole with Tamer beside him on the front row, and right at the back will be the combination of Hellcat and Lewis. And again, these start checks are good for us to know whether everybody's connectivity is okay, and it gives every driver a little bit of experience of what it's like in the rundown towards turn 1 with a packed grid. So it's lights out and away we go. We see all of our drivers getting away. Tamer bogging down a little bit there, getting a bit of wheel spin, trying to launch the car without traction control and putting too much power through the rear wheels. But as they come into turn 1 then, I think we're going to see that everybody is relatively okay. Everybody has got off the line nice and safely as well, which is fantastic to see, albeit Hellcat delayed a little bit on the start there, just bogging down, as we see Insubordinate trying to hold the momentum there and going out onto the grass and getting a nasty bit of a tailspin there and actually catching the car very nice as Phil Deadly experiences the same, and the Hellcat gets caught up in that. So a three-way collision between our drivers there, an instant kicking off. But meanwhile, up front in the little run down towards turn 6, we can see that Tamer already picking picking up a half-second penalty for a cut at what most likely was turn number 4 there. It's the one you normally end up cutting a bit too aggressively, and as he makes his way around through turn 6, having burnt a little bit of that penalty already due to the way the corner comes in and trail braking in, we now make our way down towards turn number 8, and it will be Supremo leading our drivers down into the triple chicane for this only time of asking the stuck check race. We see Heedless flash his lights. They've definitely got something with regards to his control bindings to cause his lights to flash under heavy braking, or at least it would seem that way, and Spinky getting a little bit sideways there through the triplet of corners as he comes up into 11. Tamer not in the position to strike, as we can see that Tamer actually feeling a bit of pressure from Lewis, who goes to the move on the inside here into the hairpin, and a nice move by the Portuguese, just taking the door, opening it even wider, and then slamming it shut behind him and taking the position in the process as they make their way down towards 13 and 14. A difficult pair of corners to run behind someone with, but Tamer's going to give it a try here, and I think he's just carried a bit too much momentum in, as we can see that he's run onto the grass. And now looking further behind, Spinky and Heedless, the two teammates making their way into the final corner right now, and we're going to see that Supremo is going to be the one to bring this stuck check home in first place. Behind him is going to be Spinky, and I think it's going to be Heedless in a little bit of a drag race with well, it's going to be Lewis in the end. In fact, Lewis pipping Heedless to the line, and Lewis just picking up that third place right at the end there. Tamer in 5th place, and it's going to be Phil Deadly who's making his way up towards the final corner right now. I think our rear three have had a bit of a difficult opening stuck check race here, but of course this helps them iron out the mistakes which they may be vulnerable to a little bit later on. So it's all good right now. Remember, at this point we're only worried about connectivity and making sure everybody has a chance to get used to the start of the race and that opening lap. But once we get the qualifying and the race is underway, there's no more restarts. We see Insubordinate and Hellcat drag racing to a line here. Hellcat's got the slingshot on. Will he have enough to get across the line? It's going to be very close, but Hellcat can't quite do it. He misses out in the end by 8 thousandths of a second. As we say, congratulations to all our drivers for a successful stuck check. So now we are waiting for most likely what is going to be at least another stuck check. But we are getting affirmation from some of our drivers already in the Discord chat that everything seems to be working a-okay, and everybody seems to be not bouncing around, no major lag spikes from anyone or no major connectivity issues. But we are now really just counting down the clock and waiting to see if our two outstanding drivers are going to be turning up as we get underway with a second stuck check race here. Standard procedure, of course, we get at least 2 stuck checks in to make sure everybody is able to pull off the line. Because you can't just base your science on a single experimental result. You've got to do multiple tests to confirm the theory. So here we go again then, and this time it is going to be Heedless who starts us off on the front row, and Phil Deadly alongside him, and Insubordinate and Spinky Viltong making up that second row. Again, we're going to give you a feel of what it's like to start towards the rear of the pack. We're going to be riding on board with the Portuguese driver of Lewis this time as they look for those red lights. There are 5 red lights, and it's going to be go, go, go. Green lights, and you can see immediately trying to get on that power, revving the engine out, but now charging it up through the gears as quickly as possible through that manual gearbox. He's got Tamer in his rearview mirror on the left-hand side there, but he's cleared Tamer already, who bogged down at the start. And you can see Lewis going for a nice early move on the Hellcat, who went deep to try and cut in nice and early, but then Tamer has exploited that as well. And Hellcat has been a little bit vulnerable at that turn 1, and drivers are now starting to pick on him for it, as we see Spinky Viltong, Phil Deadly, and also what looks to be, well, it was Insubordinate who was in amongst that, and we can see that Spinky bouncing across the circuit and taking Tamer with him for his concern. And meanwhile, all of our drivers making their way over the hill right now. Heedless just running away, and well, this is kicking off, albeit this is a stuck check race, but it's tempting to really start to build things up. As you can see behind that, Lewis right now up into P3, and Insubordinate getting ever closer is the American. And if this is what it's going to be like after a stuck check race, well, I can only imagine what's going to happen in the real deal, as we've had it all kick off behind, and Lewis right now under pressure from the American. Insubordinate trying to to put some pressure on and trying to get a feel for what it's like battling someone down to turn 8. In fact, Lewis went very deep there, and Insubordinate decided to try and go for the move. There was a little bit of contact. I think Lewis may feel that if that happens in the actual race, he might be calling that to the stewards for a little bit of a push to pass. But Insubordinate would argue that the door was open and Lewis should have respected the fact he was there. But it's going to be 4 wide down into the hairpin as we see Phil Deadly going extremely deep, and I think Insubordinate gave him a hit on the back there and immediately waits for him to rejoin, because we could see Insubordinate immediately slamming on the brakes there. Great sportsmanship shown as all of our drivers now come down the hill towards turn number 13 and 14, and you can see Phil Deadly and Hellcat racing once again, and Hellcat going for a massive lunge there on the inside and actually making it stick. There was a little bit of a rub, but it means that Phil Deadly has lost the place. But as they come out of the final corner, then it is going to be Heedless this time who brings things home at the head of the pack for this second Stuck Chip race, as behind the Scotsman it is going to be Lewis, who made his way all the way up from P7 to P2, and then even further back it will be Supremo T, who's going to come across the line in 3rd place. Round off our podium, Hellcat in 4th, Insubordinate in 5th, Phil Deadly in P6, Spinky in P7. Not a good race this one, a good warm-up race for Spinky, and definitely not a good one for the Egyptian of Tamer, who's going to round off our field in P8. Congratulations to all of our drivers once again for a successful start check, and now we look forward to the next part. It's great to see already, despite the fact it's just a Stuck Check race there, a lot of our drivers showing that racing respect in terms of if they knock somebody off, they're immediately waiting. And I think we can expect that going into the races tonight. We're going to see a lot of great sportsmanship, which is encouraged, of course, but at the same time, if things happen and sportsmanship doesn't prevail, drivers are always encouraged to report things to the stewards rather than start to kick off a paddy in the Discord chat, just so that way the stewards can look at it and we can, at the end of the day, help drivers improve. Because there's dirty drivers and then there's bad driving. And we don't normally have dirty drivers here. Instead, we typically, if we're going to see something like that, it would be classified as bad driving, and that's what the stewards exist for. It's to help people learn when they've driven bad and how they can fix it. And speaking of driving bad, Lewis there deciding to prang the wall by going a little bit too wide off of the exit of turn 3, just carrying way too much momentum on cold tyres. But everybody is currently sat in the paddock, and I believe we are going to be getting qualifying underway very shortly. Our drivers are wishing one another good luck right now down in the paddock, and I think it's going to be the case that we're going to get the time of day change, and then it is go, go, go. And I'm just going to get confirmation for you, ladies and gentlemen, whether we're proceeding with only 8 drivers. Yeah, we are going to be proceeding with the minimum allotment of 8 drivers. We will be getting qualifying underway very shortly for you, ladies and gentlemen. Qualifying is about to start. I've had confirmation from our lobby host and our trackside steward tonight, Pies1123. Many of you will know him. He is one of the ultimate veterans of the GTSRL community. He's almost as old as the furniture that makes up the GTSRL stewarding office. Don't tell him I told you that, though. He might be a little bit angry at that. And we are underway. 12 minutes of qualifying. It's going to be go, go, go as soon as our drivers can get out there. And I'm going to take a quick sip of water before I lose my voice. Alrighty then, folks, so qualifying 12 minutes. Who is going to be on pole come the end of it? Well, the first driver to make his way out of the pits will be the American of Insubordinate. Now, Insubordinate normally likes to get a good number of laps in. We have seen 2 strategies, of course, in our qualifying sessions. We've either seen drivers go for multiple fast laps where they don't worry about burning fuel and they just try and get the best possible time as fuel wears out the car. or what we see from the more strategic drivers will be a bit of fuel burning to begin with, then a banker lap, and then a lot of fuel burning and one final fast lap. But that's normally done by drivers who feel that they've got the pace to be in the top half of the field without having to worry about getting rid of the fuel, and then they go for that ultimate fuel burning to try and secure their position on the front row of the grid. And insubordinate immediately going to work and getting out there and getting a good lap in. And remember, our drivers are required to space out. They're meant to be giving one another about 2 to 3 seconds of room minimum, but we'd ideally recommend 5 to 6 seconds, so that way they do not trip over one another and they do not inherit from the slipstream of a driver ahead of them, which can provide up to 1 to 2 seconds of lap time advantage in GT Sport, even on the real slipstream settings, which is a window of 0.75 seconds back behind the car in front. But anyway, we focus on nonetheless. We don't worry too much about the slipstream right now. Everybody out on the circuit, and we can see that Lewis just coming through the triple chicane right now, giving himself plenty of room to heedless, and I think he'll be grateful for that. He's got about a 6-second window to heedless as they make their way up into turn 12. And then we've got Phil Deddy, who's just come out the triple chicane, the Irishman running up that hill as quickly as he possibly can. Hellcat a little bit further back, and then we've got Supremo T. I was going to say Supremo Moto GP then. I was going to completely butcher the name. Not going to do that to the Mexican. He's letting Spinky through. I think he's just going to give Spinky the space here, and he's going to do a little bit of fuel burning along the way as well, Supremo. But meanwhile, all the way up front, it's insubordinate, and we are going to jump on board with the American for the opening flying lap. So he makes his way across the start-finish line and in 5th gear, coming up through the gears as quickly as possible and coming into turn number 1. Braking at about that 50 board, in fact, about 45 metres from corner, and coming into 4th gear and just holding and letting the car run a little bit wide there. I think he's been sent a little bit too wide off of the corner there as he goes out onto the grass and just catches the car before the rear end starts to snap over on him. A very good catch there by the American, but that will have cost him the best part of about a 10th, just trying to get the car back under control. He goes to the uphill section right now, and a good run uphill here, looking much more stable in the uphill run as he comes over the hill and gliding into the wall there and getting stuck on the wall a little bit. That's going to compromise a huge chunk of the lap, but he presses on nonetheless. And you can see going into turn 6, just not having the speed to carry him beyond the curb there, or at least go for an late apex, and that has compromised his line ever more in the fact that he has lost a bit of speed down into the triple chicane. But he continues with 48.4 at the halfway mark on the circuit, which is not too bad of a lap, but we do expect a little bit more from insubordinate on the next couple of laps as he cuts across and tries to straight line the triple chicane as much as possible there. And these cars being very light, 718 kilograms is the weight of this KTM machine, and what that effectively means is you are driving a very light little kit car, which at the end of the day is going to bounce around when you throw it up on a curb. And remember, as we said yesterday, the curbs at Yamagiwa are inverse curbs in the fact they raise quite sharply off of the road surface, they come to a peak, and then they start to slant away from the track out towards the grass. So using too much curb is very dangerous in these cars because the wheels will get hooked over the curb and then you get pulled off into the distance and you essentially say hello to Narnia. But still, insubordinate keeping it together through the 3rd sector, and now 4th sector coming into the final corner. A good run out 13 and 14 has really benefited him, and actually I think that's made up a lot of the lap time he's lost in sectors 1 and 2 as he now comes out the final corner. This hasn't been the perfect lap from the American, and he immediately makes his way over to the right hand side to go for another lap, so he knows there's plenty more out there. But he's going to set the pace at a 52.2. And what about Heedless? Well, Heedless is on a best of anyone so far. It'll be the 2nd lap in. It will be a 1:49.5. Meanwhile, what about Lewis, the Portuguese driver? Well, he doesn't seem to be on a purple right now. In fact, this has been quite a heavily compromised lap. He's coming across the line here, and it is going to be a 54.7. Meanwhile, Phil right now coming down to complete his opening flying lap as we say hello to Zoronic in the chat, and it is a 52.6. Hellcat coming through the final corner as well, and Hellcat here trying to do his most to get himself off of that bottom step. As we saw back in season 36, he's typically qualifying towards the back, but he'll be hoping that it's not the case today for the British driver as he makes his way across the line here, a 54.8, and Spinky comes across the line only seconds behind with a 50.8. And then the Mexican, Supremo T, he comes across the line here, and it is a 49.7, only 2/10 off of our provisional pole. And what about the Egyptian of Tamil? What can he achieve here on his opening flying lap? Well, this isn't looking too bad of a lap. I think we're looking at probably a 52 or a 53 right now as he makes his way all the way down. He's staying over to that left-hand side to straight line it to the timing line, and it is going to be a 52.8, putting in provisional P6. So far, first blood has been drawn up by Heedless with a 49.5. You can see he's 2 tenths up on anybody else around the field. Meanwhile, what about Insubordinate? Well, Insubordinate right now making his way down towards 13 and 14, and we do believe that the American does have a bit more in the tank in terms of lap time. We're expecting there's going to be at least a 51 from the American as he goes deeper and deeper into this qualifying session, because his opening flying lap was quite heavily compromised by some wall contact going into sector 2, and also quite an awkward line through the triple chicane. As he makes his way down towards the timeline here, he immediately starts to come back over to the right, thinking that he's got plenty more in the tank. But it is not an improvement, in fact. And what about Heedless? Well, Heedless, we can see coming across the line and does not improve either right now. And what about Supremo? Well, Supremo is purple going up the hill here, so Supremo on a solid, but I think something has gone very wrong for Supremo in the fact that he is backed off completely and he is going to have to go again. So perhaps he went into the wall and, in fact, spinning the car there into the wall. Supremo not having a good time and having to get that car turned around as more drivers come through. Lewis right now, however, have improved to a 50.6, so he's moved all the way up from the back of the field all the way up to provisional P3 and finds himself the best part of a second down on our provisional pole sitter right now, but he's only 1.5 tenths clear of this man right here, the Irishman of Phil Deadly, and we expect that Phil is going to be on another fly. He has improved to a 50.7, and I think a lot of drivers being caught out by cold tyres on their opening flying lap here, as we see Phil is pretty much matching his opening sector right now and making his way down through sector 2 he goes. What is he able to achieve here as he comes charging through turn 6, going for a nice deep cut line there and then trying to come back for that late apex, missing the apex a little bit, but he hasn't lost too much time because he's kept the throttle planted throughout. He'll just lose a little bit of turning angle, but it should enable him to have a good amount of speed. He's pretty much matching his sectors so far. He's only 700ths down on his personal best after 2 sectors, so this is looking a strong lap from Phil, but as he goes sideways out of 9, they're losing a bit of time, not able to completely straight line the car over turn 9. Instead it bounced off the curb and Phil continues on his way through 11 and up into 12 now, but he can make up a lot of time in the final sector. The final sector is where the lap is made or lost if you've had a solid sector 3, and it's really the second half of lap, I would argue, which is where all the time is locked up, as we can see that Phil this time are not improving considerably, and he's actually, I think, going to have to go for another lap very shortly, and perhaps a fresh pair of tyres, as we've only got 4.5 minutes of this qualifying session remaining now, so our drivers will start to up the ante. And speaking of up in the ante, look who is, well, my apologies, not up into P2, look who has just jumped all the way up into provisional P3. It's Insubordinate 73 with a 150.5. The American driver there starting to nail it. We said he had plenty of time and he has found that time and is looking to improve even more. So we're Insubordinate right now, definitely trying to fight his way onto that second row of the grid, as we see that Phil Deadly is trying to improve and not improving that time around and going for one more lap. But surely in a minute he may be considering a switch back to a new set of tyres. As we say hello to Sweet Love in the chat as well, and we hope all those who've joined recently, you're all doing well and you've had a good day, of course. And we can see that Spinky right now in that provisional P6, well, 150.8 on his flying lap, and a very consistent pair of qualifying laps, but of course Spinky will want to do a bit better, and I think he is coming around and burning some fuel before going on to two more flying laps. As we see him come across the line then, the British driver is going to get underway and we're going to hop on board to see what he is able to achieve. So he goes across that timing line then and looking to improve on a 50.8, his best so far, coming into turn 1, and you're going to see he goes a little bit towards the centre of the hairpin corner here, the extended left-hand sweeping hairpin, as we do know that Tamer has just improved and gone 500ths faster than Spinky and moved himself up into P6. So the Egyptian there trying to keep his place on the third row, but focusing on Spinky, a good opening sector so far, just a little bit sideways on the mark on turn number 4 there, but then keeping it together at turn 5 and straight lining it across the sector here, and you can see he has improved by 200ths in sector 1 and now making his way into sector 2, into turn 6. Can he get it nailed here so he balances the throttle correctly? He does a good job of getting the turn in there and almost clips the apex curve as late as possible, misses it by a small margin and almost hits the rev limiter there, coming out through turn 7 and down into 8. The car sliding from side to side, but he's 6/10 faster than his previous best, so Spinky definitely has got a lot in store. He just needs to find a way to nail the lap, and a good run through the triple chicane there. It wasn't perfect, but it was smooth enough as he fights his way up the hill towards turn 11 and then into turn 12. And let's see if he's able to improve even more with one more sector to go after this one. So turn 12 awaits here, the very slow hairpin corner here, the slowest corner on the circuit. He gets a little bit wide there, gets on the power too early, and that flicks the car off of the apex. But he is improving. He's still approximately 3.5 tenths up on his personal best. So this is looking to be a sizable improvement from the British driver, but he gets it a little bit wide at 14, but he catches the car. That was a very nice catch there to recognise he was going to miss the apex, and so he hasn't been the lap completely. I do think this is going to be an improvement from the British driver, and he will still have one more lap to go before his qualifying session is over. As he makes his way up the line then, and he starts to head back towards the timing line, he stays over to the right hand side to go for the racing line, and therefore the qualifying lap line, or the optimal qualifying lap line, but he does improve by 4 tenths on that one. He goes for one last lap, so 50.4 moves him up into provisional P5 right now, and Spinky still thinks he's got more, as we do have a new provisional pole sitter, and that is Supremo T with 49.2. He's gone for those fresher tyres, and he comes across the line once again, and it's now a 49.1, so the Mexican has struck back at the Scotsman here. And what has the Scotsman got in the tank in the form of Heedless? Can he respond? He is on his final lap right now, we believe, where it's going to be very close for him to get across the line in time. Has Heedless got anything to respond here, or has Supremo snatched out that pole position from under him, or will it be Lewis, who we believe is on an outlap right now? So Lewis will not, well, he will be getting in one more lap. He'll just make the timing line, we reckon, as Lewis gets very sideways there out of turn 12, so pushing it to the limit to try and get it home. As we look back at Heedless, who is coming across the sector line there, and Heedless is not going to improve, and I do not know if he's going to have enough time to get across the line. Has anything else changed in terms of the qualifying order so far? Well, we see the insubordinate going on to his final lap now, the American, needing to find a way to get 500ths to pip Spinky Biltong up into P5. But we do look back right now, we can see that Supremo on an even faster lap. He's purple in sectors 1, 2, but goes a little bit too aggressive on the curve at turn 9 and spins into the wall. So that is his final lap complete. He will not be able to improve any further, and with only 9 seconds to go, it will be Heedless coming across the line here to do one more lap. As the camera pans round here, and we can see that they are the final guys to complete their laps. Also to go on to their final laps, and the first driver then who is going to complete their final qualifying lap right now is going to be Hellcat on a 52.8 so far. Can the British driver improve even further? I don't think this is going to be an improvement. I think he will be starting last, unfortunately for the Brits. Meanwhile, behind him, Spinky Biltong improves to a 49.7, putting in provisional P3. That is a very good job by Spinky. Can the drivers around him improve to match it, or will it be a case that he's crept it out of nowhere, as we see that Lewis has got it very wrong in sector 1, so Lewis will not be improving. Spinky has jumped onto that second row, but what about the other drivers who still get their qualifying laps to complete? What will they be able to do? As we see Tamara has parked up, improving to a 50.8, so that puts him in P7 overall, and Supremo right now coming out the final corner. I think Supremo's got it wrong somewhere, because this is not an improvement anymore, so he's going to be, I believe, on pole with that 49.1. Heedless has not improved so far. Not going purple anywhere in the first 2 sectors, but he may be able to improve. In fact, he's backing out of it, I believe, and letting another driver through in the form of Phil Deadly, but I'm not sure what's happening to Phil here, who I think has had to back out of things. So I think there's a little bit of a miscommunication between these 2 drivers, as we can see that Heedless has got out of the way at the last possible moment, and Phil now makes his way along, but Phil was already 15 seconds down on a lap, so I think for them it's a case of miscommunication and no iteration, as that is our qualifying laps complete now. Nobody else has got any more time out on circuit, so that means pole is going to go to the Mexican, a Supremo T with a 49.1. What a brilliant lap on his debut in EU Division 3 Season 39, and he will be joined on the front row by Heedless, who in the end qualified behind him by 4 tenths of a second. That 49.5 not being enough for pole, Supremo pulling something out of nowhere. And then look at this, Spinky Biltong with a 49.7, lining up at the head of the second row, and he'll be joined alongside, only a tenth down, by Lewis No Regrets, or Lewis as we refer to him. We then got Phil Daly, who is P5, and alongside him will be the American of Insubordinate. Phil very unlucky there to miss out on the second row by only 3.5 hundredths, and Insubordinate will be joining him on that third row, and then the last row will be started off by the Egyptian of Tamir, and he'll be joined alongside by the Brit of Hellcat. So that is your qualifying order there, ladies and gentlemen. A tight qualifying session, particularly for the front 2 rows. It was unpredictable, and we thought Heedless had it, but in the end, it seemed to be the case that instead the Mexican of Supremo literally just grabbed it with his final flying lap. And it was good for he did it on that lap, because the one after that was a disaster. And I think Heedless is kicking himself right now, thinking that he should have been on pole. We're hearing down in the paddock he's not too happy at the fact that he's qualified in P2. He felt he was on course for pole position, but just couldn't hook it up in the end. But he is joined by his teammate Spinky, who is in P3. And I think the pair of drivers will be very happy with the fact that they are very close to one another, and so they can work together over the course of the race. Because remember, it's not only a Drivers' Championship, but it is also a Constructors' Championship, and Spinky and Heedless will be sure to work together to try and get the best possible result. And we are hearing actually that Heedless had a little bit of an incident coming out of the pit lane, going onto his final flying lap, and that is why his lap was aborted in the end. But it's been very close, as we see Lewis right now parked up, the Portuguese driver, just waiting to get underway. And I think all of our drivers right now are just being patient and waiting for Pies to kick things off. As we do get the time of day change once again, and that signals the fact that everyone is expected now to get ready up for race number 1. And be sure to place your bets right now. Who do you think is going to be the winner by the end of it? I personally think we have got a four-way fight for the win in this one. Because what we saw in EU Division 2 yesterday was the fact that despite drivers qualifying on pole, they weren't necessarily the fastest in the race, and the car really starts to come alive in terms of the tyres after the first lap. On the second lap, that's where the pace starts to be unleashed, and that's where our drivers found some difficulty if they were on pole, as drivers behind them really started to come into the game. But also the slipstream was quite strong. It took time for the cars to build up the pace, but if you can run safely in the slipstream behind another car, I get used to the understeer effect of the dirty air, then you can be a very close and competitive going into corners such as turn 6, the downhill into the triple chicane at turn 8, and of course the run all the way up the hill towards turn 12. As we say hello to K Tucson, who's given us the Top Gear top tip, which is just to effing send it. Well, can't disagree with you there. I believe that's why they had to turn off the penalty system in GT Sport in the end. But jokes aside, there is a time to send it. I do agree with you, and we did see a good number of sends last night in EU Division 2. But just make sure to go for the send on the bend, where you won't need to mend the relationship with the driver you hit in the rear end. As race number 1 is about to get underway, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. The countdown is here. Who is going to be our winner come the end of 5 laps? Let's find out. So as you pan down to the grid then, on your left-hand side, it is the Mexican of Supremo. On your right-hand side, it's Heedless. Behind them, Spinky and Lewis. Who is going to be coming away with the win? And it's lights out and away we go. And Heedless getting the much better start by comparison with Supremo there. Supremo bogging down. And I think Heedless' reaction time there was absolutely phenomenal. He's going to have the inside line into turn 1. And Supremo is going to hang it around the outside here, as we see behind Lewis getting ahead of Spinky in the run through into turn 1. But Spinky returning by having the inside line into 2. But meanwhile up front, we can see there's been contact between Phil and Hellcat there. Both drivers getting knocked wide. That Heedless was side by side by Supremo. But Supremo backing out of it at the last possible moment there to keep the momentum up the hills. We see Spinky and Lewis chasing after, and our top 4 have already broken away for the rest of the pack, as there's been a major incident. We have got drivers everywhere, and I think Phil and Hellcat had some major contact between them, but are respecting one another immediately. And I think Insubordinate and Tamer also got caught up in that mix. We will take a look back in a little bit, as we see Spinky Biltol going very wide out of turn 6 there, lose a lot of momentum. He comes back on and knocks Lewis almost onto the grass, but Lewis holds it together and Spinky lifts off immediately, as we see Heedless and Supremo going to town versus one another into turn 8, but Supremo backing out of it, realising 2 do not go into 1 into turn 8 there, and as they make their way out the hill, Supremo is going to have the better run over the brow of the hill up into turn 11 and then through to 12, and now under the braking zone here, will it be the case that Lewis gets involved, as he is quite close, as we can see the Portuguese driver does look for a cheeky little peek on the inside, and meanwhile further back I'm hearing that Insubordinate and Tamer have had some sort of incident, and Insubordinate lifted out things immediately, and I'm not sure what's going on here, folks. We will take a look back, but Insubordinate Insubordinate literally putting on the warning lights there, but we will focus on the battle up front right now because that's where it's all kicking off, and we see that Lewis getting a little bit sketchy off the exit curve of 14 as our top four make their way into the final corner, and it really does seem to be the case that all four of these drivers have the pace to win the race right now as Spinky goes to the mover and gets it on the inside of Lewis. What if Lewis taking a deep line in? So after one lap then, it is Heedless CDs, followed by Supremo, followed by Spinky Milton, and then Lewis in our top four right now. The gap between our fourth place... Oh, geez, we had a stuck check. That was a mistake. Well, I thought we were racing then. My sincere apologies. We seem to have mistakenly gone for another stuck check. Well, it'll be Tammer coming over in P5, Hellcat P6, Phil Deadly in P7, and Insubordinate in P8. Now, if Heedless can have that happen in the real race, I think he'll be very grateful. But there's the rather sheepish change to 5 laps there from Pies, and we immediately get underway once again. So now it will be race number 1. Who's going to be a winner by the end of it? Let's find out. As we pan down to the grid then, once again it will be Supremo T on pole on the left hand side and Heedless on the right. Behind them Spinky and Lewis on the second row. Our top 4 looking very feisty to go racing once again. That's lights out and away we go, and you can see immediately this time Heedless not getting the jump on Supremo as much as he immediately pulls over to the right there, trying to essentially get himself alongside Supremo to block him from being able to do what he did last time, but Supremo was not called out for the second time. But meanwhile Lewis getting the jump on Spinky, and this time Spinky's not able to try and cut it back, and instead they're going to run up the hill here, and we can see this time all of our drivers also making a clear run out to turn 1, and no major incident as they all come up, although we can see that Hellcat and Tam are going toe to toe up the hill section here, and Hellcat going wide and going into the wall, and Tammer moving up into 7th place. Hellcat just carrying a little bit too much momentum there off of the curb at turn 3, but up front Supremo making a break already as we see Heedless not feeling comfortable in the momentum, and Spinky and P4 feeling some pressure from Phil Deadly, but Phil going very deep into turn 6. He'll regain the momentum as he comes out the corner because he's now got a much longer straight run all the way downhill in towards turn number 8, but Phil right now feeling a lot more powerful as we see Lewis going for the move on Heedless there, and that was a very well placed move because Heedless went deep by default, and we can see that as a result of that Spinky getting knocked a little bit at turn 9 by what appeared to be Heedless as he rejoined into the sequence, but it's free wide over the hill, and Phil Deadly getting pushed a little bit onto the grass there, but he's given enough space to return as Spinky is in P5, and Insubordinate, the American, has jumped up into P4, and Tammer is right on the mix here as we can see that Lewis has gone wide and he's spun out onto the track. He's gone off on the grass there, and the Portuguese driver's now got it all to do, and that means now our race leader Supremo has broken away a little bit, and Heedless has no pressure from the guys behind us. He's no longer got the Portuguese driver trying to put pressure on him, and Insubordinate up into 3rd place. Well, I think if you asked him at the start of this race, he wouldn't know that was coming, but still as they come through the final corner then, Spinky Wilton trying to size himself up for a move on Insubordinate as they come out the corner and head on their way to lap number 2. So after one lap, it is Supremo T, the Mexican, leading by 2.1 seconds ahead of Heedless, followed by Insubordinate, who's been hunted by Spinky, and Insubordinate going defensive into turn 1, immediately taking a very heavy defensive line, and Spinky can capitalise on this if Insubordinate can't park it on the apex, but Insubordinate does for the brief period of time, and Spinky struggling to get the overlap there as they come out to turn 1, and Insubordinate runs it as wide as he possibly can and just catches the car to go to the uphill section. In P5 it is Phil Deadly being chased by Tammer, the Egyptian driver, making gains where others have fallen. Hellcat in P7 and Lewis in P8 right now. Lewis having to do it all again as we've got yellow flags. What has happened here? It is Phil Deadly. What has happened to the Irishman? So as he was making his way then out of turn 1, we're going to see that Phil's going to have a lot of momentum going up the hill here, and it looks as though he's got it wrong at turn 3. As he runs off of 3 then, he goes into 4, and as the camera pans around, he just goes too deep off of 4, too much momentum, and that sends him into the wall. That's a disaster for the Irishman, who was having a really strong run there, and is now down in last place. But meanwhile, we look back to the lead action right now, and we can see that things have calmed down a little bit. Well, I say they've calmed down, and then Spinky goes and picks up a half-second penalty for track limits at turn number 9, and that is going to pull Spinky well off of the hunt for the podium and pull him back into the clutches of the Egyptian of Tamer for certain. The British driver will not be best pleased with that, as we see even further back Hellcat in P6 right now, and he's got Lewis chasing after him. The Portuguese driver not finding a way past the Brit right now as they make their way into turn 12. Lewis goes for the move, in fact, and Hellcat opens the steering, noticing Lewis just went for it at the last possible moment, and it was a well dive by Lewis, but it's worked out, and Hellcat did well to notice it coming as Lewis now makes his way down towards 13. I think Hellcat doesn't have a response in return. But meanwhile, up front, we can see that insubordinate right now, he's got Spinky on his 6, but Spinky taking the tight line, but he's got to burn that penalty, and that's going to cost him the momentum he needs down the straight here. And I think we are going to be seeing that Tamer is going to have a little bit more momentum over Spinky, but he's a long way back as the Egyptian. He's the best part onto that straight at 1.7 seconds. He's closing it down, but he's nowhere near close enough to capitalise. But meanwhile, behind, we can see Hellcat falling down the order right now, and Phil the Irishman is going to be making a move on him into turn 1. And as they come onto lap number 3 then, Hellcat on the outside, Phil on the inside, Phil going for one of the standard moves here. You go into turn 1, can you plant on the apex? And Hellcat tries to cut back early, but Phil blocks it off. A nice block there by Phil, and now they make their way out of turn 1 and up the hill through 2, 3, 4, 5 and down towards 6. As we can see that Phil has got the momentum to start to pull away a little bit from the British driver. Nice move by the Irishman. But meanwhile, as we look back up front, we can see that our order has spaced out a little bit right now, and really the closest drivers out of the circuit are those hunting P3. P3 being owned by Insubordinate right now, and Spinky Biltong 1.1 seconds down, and behind them we do have Tamer, the Egyptian driver, who is looking at his first top 5 in GTSRL if he can keep it together as they make their way through the triple chicane. Spinky getting a lot more momentum by comparison to the two drivers around him, and we ride on board with Spinky right now. As you can see from his perspective, the British driver on his last lap of 52.6, well off the pace of the guys right up the front, but chasing the pace of Insubordinate as he makes his way into turn 12. Insubordinate going very deep there and having to quickly bring the car back under control before it went to the grass, and I think he's going to have a chance here, Spinky. He's going to have to time it right. We're going to stay on board with the British driver for a little bit longer as they go into 14, and he tries to snap it over the apex curb. He gets it very nicely planted over the curb there, and Insubordinate running onto the grass and losing a little bit of momentum now as they come into the final corner here. Watch out, because if Spinky's going to go for the move, as Insubordinate goes very deep here, and that means that Spinky's going to be side by side with Insubordinate, or not quite. Instead he tucks it behind, but this is going to put Spinky in the best place he's ever been to go for the move for P3 coming on to lap number 4. He's going to have a lot of momentum here. He's only a 10th down on the American driver. The Brit and American go into turn 1. The American goes defensive on the inside, the Brit to the outside. Spinky tries to cut back in, and Insubordinate parks it on the apex. He's known to do this very well, but they are side by side. There's a little bit of contact as Insubordinate is just slightly forced wide a little bit there, puts one wheel onto the grass, and Spinky has got up into P3, but will Insubordinate come back? And that is the big question. And as they make their way over the brow of the hill now towards turn number 6, I think Insubordinate's lost the momentum for the time being, but of course there is the chance that Insubordinate will come back a lap later. It's all about nailing these sweepers now, and Spinky taking such a tight line through turn number 8, and it's not working out for Spinky right now in terms of being able to break away. As you can see, he has had the better momentum off the corner, but Insubordinate is still there on his 6 and trying to hunt him down. Now meanwhile up front, I can tell you that the lead has dropped from 2.1 seconds, which was owned by Supremo T. He's still in the lead, mind you. It's now dropped down to 1.4 seconds. Heedless really pushing hard. He owns the fastest lap, that 148.883 being set on lap number 2, and Heedless setting the fastest possible laps and gradually closing up to our race leader right now. But is there enough time for him to go for a move for the lead? I don't think so, as Heedless gets it horrifically wrong at turn 14. That's a disaster for the Scottish driver, but he gets it back under control, clattering into the wall there, and Spinky and the crew for P3 will be coming through as quickly as they possibly can. The gap has dropped from what was at the time 7.5 seconds all the way down to 4.3 seconds. I think it will be the case that Heedless will be safe to hold on to P2. He's only got one more lap to do it, but what a scare there for the Scotsman. He's got to be thinking right now that that is a nightmare, and he won't want that to happen again, because he was gaining so much on Supremo Turismo, but then again, perhaps he was pushing too hard, Heedless, this early on, and perhaps that's going to make him think about his choices, as we see further back Lewis getting it very rolled by looks of things coming out of turn 14. We're just going to take a look back at what happened there. So he did spin by looks of things. He was up towards Phil Deadly, but he spun it out of turn 14 from what we're seeing. And now on that final lap, all of our drivers are right now. And we can see that Insubordinate now coming under a bit of pressure is the American for the Egyptian of Tama behind. And as we jump on board with Tama right now, he's making his way up towards turn number 6 for the final time of asking. We can see that the Egyptian is coming into form as he goes deeper and deeper into the race, feeling comfortable where others do not, and just applying that consistency as he rides on the apex curve there. As we see Spinky ahead has actually gone a bit wide. Tama goes a bit wide as well and almost repeats the Spinky, but instead manages to get it back under control. Unlike Spinky, who's lost a lot of momentum because of that. We now hop to the exterior camera once again, but you can see that that hunt for P3 is not over as Spinky goes very slow, and Spinky's lost it! Spinky's into the wall at turn number 10, and that promotes Insubordinate up into P3. Just too aggressive through the triple chicane was the British driver, and now Insubordinate back up onto the podium, and he's just got to nail a couple more corners. Or will it be a surprise podium for the Egyptian driver behind him? Hold your fingers and wait and find out. Hold your breath, folks. We've still got one sector to go, and anything can happen in these remaining corners as they all make their way down the hill. And Insubordinate getting a nice clean line here. He doesn't need to do anything crazy, and you can see he's backed off it completely. But coming out of the final corner to pick up the win for race number 1, he's led it from start to finish, and he'll win by the margin of almost 9 seconds. It's Supremo T from Mexico on his debut in GTSRL. Behind him, hold on a second, we've seen Insubordinate into the wall. He went too wide out the final corner, which means Heedless will come P2, but a surprise podium for Tama, who comes across the line, does the Egyptian in P3. Insubordinate in the end, the American holding on to P4, Spinky in P5, and then behind him will be Phil Deadly in P6, the Irishman, knowing there's plenty more work to do, and Lewis in a lonely P7 right now is the Portuguese driver after what was looking to be a very strong race, only to make those mistakes, but he's got plenty more time to try and recover it as he comes across the line in P7, and then in P8 it will be Hellcat making his way out of the final corner right now and coming on to complete our race order for race number 1. As he makes his way to the timing line, then congratulations to all of our drivers, but in particular to our race winner, Supremo T from Mexico. Well, that was an absolute shocker of a race 1 in terms of all the ups and downs. Not in terms of the racing. We love the racing, of course, but who could have expected that? Supremo T winning by the region of 8.9 seconds over Heedless with that near fatal mistake right towards the end on lap number 4, and a podium for the Egyptian of Tama 2010. He's going to be grinning from ear to ear right now. I'm sure he would have expected that, but that goes to show consistency pays. Insubordinate in P4, the American, knowing that he threw away a podium right at the end, but there's plenty more time to come back and grab another one with 2 races remaining, and Spinky rounding off our top 5. Spinky and Insubordinate both being victims of mistakes right at the end when it really mattered, and the fastest lap going to the Scotsman of Heedless on lap number 2, a 48.883. The fastest lap that we have seen tonight as far as I recall. Well, that was race number 1, and we've still got 2 more races to go. But we're going to take a quick sip of water. And we wait now to get underway with race number 2, another 5-lap sprint. But what a fantastic race so far, and it is definitely the case that we have got a good number of drivers here who have got the pace to be on that podium, if not outright win. We've got Heedless, we've got Supremo, we've also got Lewis, who just could not deploy that pace consistently. We've got Spinky, we've also got Insubordinate, And we've also got Tamer right now. We've got 6 drivers who are definitely within arm's reach of that podium from what we've seen in race number 1. We get the time of day change, and now we expect our drivers to ready up, and we'll be go, go, go once again. As we can see Heedless getting out into trouble. Oh, that was an interesting visual glitch there. We almost saw inside the world then. But we are just waiting for Pies to get things sorted. I believe we do have one driver who also needs to ready up. As Hellcat has left the room. I'm not sure what's happened to Hellcat here. Whether there's a technical issue or something's just gone very wrong. We're waiting for clarity. That does mean we're going to lose one of our drivers. Will they return, however? I'm sure they will. Perhaps it's just literally a quick technical bug or a restart of the router. And there's Hellcat. He has rejoined. And we're just waiting confirmation right now. We're going to get some clarity about that. Yep, Hellcat just had a disconnect there, so nothing terrible, just a disconnect. And we'll just need to remind Pies to set the grid manually, given the fact that Hellcat will now be expected to start on pole, given he fell out the lobby and has rejoined it. I'm sure Pies is aware of that though. So in fact we wouldn't need to remind him. But here we go then, ladies and gentlemen. The countdown is here. Race number 2 coming at you. 5 more laps. Who's going to be our winner by the end of it? Let's find out. So as we pan down to the grid once again, it'll be Supremo T on pole. Alongside him this time will be Heedless, Tamer in P3, Insubordinate in P4. But watch out for Lewis in P7. What can the Portuguese driver do in race number 2? And it's lights out and away we go. And Heedless this time getting the better launch by comparison with Supremo initially, but bogging down in the second phase of the launch there. And you can see further back that Insubordinate immediately getting the jump on Tamer. And in fact, we've got Phil Deadly going for a very early move on Spinky there for P5, knocking Spinky a little bit wide as a result of his entry there. And Spinky gaining some momentum as a result of it, tucking in behind immediately as all our drivers are fishtailing their way up the hill. Tamer loses a bit of momentum there coming out of the lead corner. And Phil under a lot of pressure right now, going very sideways through turn number 4, and there's contact to the back of Tamer's car, but everybody has made it up through the hill very safely there as Lewis has lost out versus Hellcat. I think losing some momentum in the sequence of corners, having to back off running behind Phil Deadly and Spinky. But as they make their way through the first corner, we can see that Supremo T has already started to break away a little bit as Heedless right now feeling some pressure, I think, for Insubordinate, and actually falling back into the clutches of a charging pack of cars, all thirsty for that P2, as we can see that Tamer under pressure from Phil Deadly. Phil trying to go around the outside. He makes a move, does Tamer. He goes to the move on Insubordinate into turn 8. A little bit of a push to pass there, but I think Insubordinate won't mind that too much. Given the fact it's lap number 1, and things do tend to calm down after lap number 1. But you can see right now the Egyptian has finished on the podium once, and he wants more of it, and he is going for it. And it's great to see as he looks at the move on Heedless into turn 2, and Heedless leaves the door open, but Tamo goes too late on the brakes, and there's contact. Heedless does rejoin in P2, but we can see that Insubordinate now has got the momentum versus Tamo as they come down through 13 and into 14, but they are all battling away for P2. It's letting our leader just break away as Spinky cuts a huge chunk out of turn 14. I think that's going to be a track limits penalty there, because he did cut a huge chunk out the corner. Or in fact, did he? No, in fact, he got it on the curb. He just lost all the momentum by doing the cut. I think he was surprised himself as we see Hellcat in P7 right now ahead of Lewis. But as they come to the end of lap number 1, then it is Supremo T leading by 2.7 seconds ahead of Heedless, who's being battled by Insubordinate for P2, Insubordinate in P3, Tabber in P4, Spinky Bulldog in P5, Phil Deadly in P6, Hellcat in P7, and Lewis in P8 as we move on to our second lap of the race. And we ride on board right now with Spinky, who's trying to find his way back into the fight versus Tamara. He goes through on the inside here, and as we switch back to the exterior camera, you're going to see they come into turn 2. They're side by side. Tamara tries to turn into it normally. There's contact between the two drivers there. Neither driver went to give way, and it's all kicked off. There's been a major incident between the pair of drivers there, and I think both of them will feel that the other should have given way. We will take a look back at that shortly, folks, but you can see Phil Deadly right now up into P4 and making his way after Insubordinate, who's having a real hash brown of turn number 6. In fact, making such a mince of turn 6 that Phil's just going to carry on his merry way, and Insubordinate's made a major error. So drivers being caught out by errors everywhere right now in race number 2, as well as Insubordinate drops down the order, and that promotes the Irishman of Phil Deadly up onto the podium step for the time being. But remember, we've still got 4 laps to go, well, 3.5 laps to go now, and anything can happen before we are at the end of race distance. But meanwhile, further back, we can see that Hellcat and Lewis side by side going through the chicane there, and now making their way uphill as we look back from Hellcat's car. And you can see, looking back from the British driver right now, the Portuguese trying to find every which way past. He goes to the move here. He goes very late on the brakes, does Lewis, by comparison with Hellcat, feeling confident with his braking potential there, and Lewis gets the move done. A nice move by the Portuguese, and up into P6 and climbing still. But let's take a look back from Phil's perspective as to what happened going up the hill there into turn number 4. So we're going to ride on board with the Irishman here, and you're going to see that neither Tammet or Spinky want to give way, and as a result both drivers carried way too much momentum into the corner and went offline there. And that's what happens when you don't settle into an order. You end up in a position where both of you drive off the line, and it can be fatal for both drivers, not just the one who's the closest to the racing line. There's only one way up through the hill, or if you're going to do it side by side, you've got to lift so much, as we saw in EU Division 2 yesterday. But still, focusing on the here and now, Tammet trying to recover his way out the field, and Insubordinate ahead of him right now in P4, and he's hunting down the American at a good rate of knots. Meanwhile, up front, we can see that lead is 3.1 seconds, where this man right here, the Scot of Heedless, is trying to hunt down Supremo, who is just running away with things a little bit as we currently speak. But as we look further back, we can see that Lewis going very sideways again through turn 4, and the Portuguese just seems to get the momentum going, and as soon as he gets the momentum it starts to build, he just makes a mistake or two, and he's having a very rough night of things, is the Portuguese right now. He's got the pace, but he just can't deploy it in the race without that risk there. But we see Hellcat in P6 and Spinky Biltong, who gets it very wrong on the curb then into the wall. So many fast drivers here being caught out by their own machinery and just running onto those curbs. Those curbs are deadly here at Yamagiwa. We've talked about it so much, and you are seeing it now, as we do see that Heedless is catching up to Supremo. The gap has come down to 2.2 seconds, so I think it is the case that Supremo's lost a little bit of time, so perhaps a minor mistake, but Heedless is starting to pull him in very gradually. As we look further back, and we can see that Insubordinate right now is being reeled in by Tama. As we look back from Insubordinate's car, with that rather crudely graffitied on logo there. I don't know who they want us to watch on Twitch, but what you can see is that Insubordinate right now feeling the pressure from the Egyptian as he's trying to chase after the American, and I think Tamir here has really got some momentum going. It's just whether he's able to nail it. But of course, he went for the move earlier on and it didn't quite work out, and perhaps he'll settle down a little bit more and go for an alternate move a little bit later on in the race. But as well as that, we've got Hellcat, who's being closed in once again by Lewis. And remember, Hellcat just driving those consistent lines right now and not really making any mistakes compared to the drivers around him, and perhaps that'll benefit him in the long run as Lewis goes to the move into turn number 1 on the 4th lap. And I think it's going to be a simple case of pass on the inside, although Hellcat comes back here. He goes to the natural cutback line, and the British driver says he's holding on to P6 for the time being, so it's not going to be as simple as perhaps Lewis thought here, as they now make their way up the hill and towards turn number 6 for the fourth time of asking. But Lewis looks for a move into 4. It's not quite there, but you could see just how much momentum Lewis has by comparison with Hellcat. As they now come over the hill, they change onto the racing line, and does Lewis look for the move here? He goes into the corner. They're side by side, albeit Hellcat's a little bit ahead right now, and we can see that Lewis manages to get on the inside, but he slides it through the corner and loses some momentum. As meanwhile up front, I can tell you that Insubordinate and Tamer have come to blows, but Tamer backs out of it immediately, recognising the fact that that would have been a push to pass. Lewis and Hellcat going into the same triple chicane sequence now, and Hellcat being defensive and blocking Lewis from trying to go round the outside and parking it on the apex. A nice defence there by Hellcat as they both make their way up to turn number 12 now, and we see up front, meanwhile, that gap has reopened a little bit. 2.2 seconds is the gap, although I say that Supremo actually losing 5 tenths out of just literally turn 14 alone, and I think it's the case the Mexican is being reeled in, as further back right now we can see that Hellcat and Lewis still battling as they make their way down towards 13 and 14, and Lewis trying to find every which way past the Brit as he's knocked on the rear and sent into the wall, and Lewis immediately waits, recognising the fact that that was a mistake on his end. So they carry on racing. It's great to see as we come towards the final lap. Of course, we don't want incidents, folks, but where they're rectified like that, I'm very happy to see that, of course. I'm sure you are too at home. But meanwhile, the race lead right now, it is a gap of 1.7 seconds on the final lap. Supremo T leading at the front of your camera. Heedless chasing after him through the uphill they go. And I think it's the case here as we see there's been something major has gone very wrong out of the final corner, and it's Lewis who has gone into the wall once again. What has happened here? He's just gone too wide out the final corner, and the car has decided to send itself onto that inside wall. Lewis just having a really difficult day at the office. As you see, all of our drivers have now spaced out a little bit, and the closest action out of the circuit really is that hunt for P number 1. It's Heedless in the rear of your camera there, having the weaker opening 2 sectors. It's the next 2 sectors, the final 2 sectors, where the Scot really catches up with the Mexican here, and it's the case of can he strip 1.5 seconds out of Supremo in the course of 4 quarters. I mean, miracles do happen, folks, but I think this is a miracle too far, if you ask me, as I'm hearing that Lewis has had a spin out at turn number 5 as well. But we focus on the action right here, right now, and we can see that Supremo just taking it nice and easy compared to Heedless as they're making their way into the final 3 quarters, and Heedless literally going on attack laps right now to try and get himself into that fight right at the end. But it's not going to be enough, I think, unless Supremo has a disastrous final corner, as Heedless also picks up a penalty there coming out of turn 14 for track limits, and we can see, I think, Supremo 1 corner to go. He comes out the final corner, he nails it, and that is going to be it, ladies and gentlemen, for race number 2. Supremo T brings it home by 2 seconds. The Mexican wins ahead of Heedless, who comes home in P2. The Scot not able to come home with the win this time around, and Phil Deadly bringing home a P3 in race number 2. He'll be pleased with that, the Irishman. It's worked out this time nicely for him, and then it'll be Insubordinate, the American, coming home in P4, having fended off the challenge from the Egyptian of Tamer, who rounds off our top 5 as he comes across the line right now. And then it's going to be Hellcat in P6 with a surprise result perhaps, but his consistency has shone through, and I think he'll be very pleased with this, the Brit, in the fact that he's just simply nailed this race. Congrats to him as he comes across the line. Spinky Biltong recovering to P7 in the end after a disastrous opening lap through the incident between himself and Tamer. Tamer in the end being the better of the two, but I think both drivers are going to get called into the stewards room for that one. And then last but not least will be Lewis coming home in P8, the Portuguese having another difficult race. Congratulations to all of our drivers, but to our race winner in particular, making it 2 out of 2, Supremo T from Mexico. So here are your race results for race number 2, subject to any stewards' inquiries, of course. Supremo T are bringing home the win by 1.9 seconds ahead of Heedless, and in third place, Phil Deadly. He'll be pleased with that podium there. Insubordinate and Tamer rounding off our top 5, and the fastest lap, a 49.366, being set by Heedless on lap number 4 in race number 2. But with 2 races complete now, we have seen a form being set up by Supremo T, the Mexican driver being ahead of the field by a small margin, seemingly having the better race starts, as we say hello to Vitor Knight 21, who is clearly here to support his fellow countryman of Lewis. Lewis is having a very difficult time right now, I'm sorry to say. Vitor having a number of spins, typically at turns 4 and 5, and sometimes as well coming out the final corner. And I believe so far it has been a P7 and a P8 for Lewis, and he's got it all to do in the final race tonight. He's had phenomenal pace, mind you. He's just not been able to deliver over the course of multiple laps. Single 1 lap pace, it's there, but he just seems to let these mistakes creep in right now from what we're seeing. But we are waiting for race number 3, and that will be the full-length feature race. 11 laps and a mandatory pit stop. After we take a very quick sip of water there, let's talk a little bit about the feature race and what we can expect from the mandatory pit stop. So we saw yesterday in EU Division 2 a good number of drivers opting to go for the fresh set of tyres, and those who did not had the advantage in terms of time on circuit, but they did lose out on the final couple of laps, particularly that battle for the lead in the end between Picciola and also HBoss GT, where HBoss decided not to go for the tyre change to hold on to track position for the lead, but Picciola on the fresher compound was able to go for the move right at the end, and that gave him the 3 out of 3 victories last night. I would say the majority of drivers here are most likely going to go for a new set of tyres, and so we should be expecting most of the pit stops to occur around the midpoint of the race, so somewhere in the region of lap 5 through to 7, but you may see 1 or 2 drivers opt to go a little bit earlier to try and undercut the field and give themselves clean space out on track. But we will, of course, wait and find out what is going to happen. That seems to be the overall trend that we have witnessed over the course of EU Division 2 tonight, and we look forward to seeing what else is going to kick off. And thank you, Vitor. Well, I'll definitely be back to commentate Division 1 in Season 40. It's just how things have worked out right now. But right now, we're just waiting for the time of day change and the lap number change. And speaking of the devil, there it is. But I think it's going to be a balancing act. A number of our drivers right now will be sitting on the fence wondering whether they switch their tyres when they come into the pit. It's all about whether you feel you can deliver consistent laps with the same set of tyres for 11 laps. The Sport Soft tyres are grippy and tyre wear is not the biggest factor, but we have seen a significant difference in terms of lap time when our drivers are driving on, say, 9 lap old super softs compared to if they're only 3 to 4 laps old. And that time differential, about half a second, is really what makes it punishing. And it's also the fact our drivers just do not have that grip available to them when they go into the heavy braking zones, such as turn 12 and at turn 15, and also turn 8, where they've got to brake so much earlier. But it's all information which will be flipping around in our drivers' heads as we are now waiting for the countdown for the final race of this evening. And do place your bets, of course. Are we expected to see a triple from Supremo T, i.e. 3 wins back-to-back tonight? Or will we see the Scotsman of Heedless pick up a win? Or will we see somebody completely different? And remember, the third step of the podium so far has been owned by 2 different drivers. It was Tamer in race number 1, and then it was Phil Deadly in race number 2. Will we see one of them back on the podium, or will we see a completely different person on the podium as well? As we get underway then with the countdown for race number 3, it's about to come at you, 11 laps. Who is going to be our winner come the end of it? Let's find out. So as we pan down to the grid then, this time it'll once again be Supremo T on the left-hand side, Heedless on the right-hand side. The rivalry continues. Still Deadly in P3 and Insubordinate in P4. But watch out once again for Speaky Biltong this time. Started in P7. What can the Brit do now? He's got nothing to lose. And it's lights out and away we go, and immediately we've seen the same as we did in race number 2. Both drivers up front getting good launches respective to one another, and Phil Deadly feeling a bit of pressure for Insubordinate. Insubordinate immediately going for the move on the inside, but Phil Deadly taking a very wide line on entry here, and in fact the Irishman going for a creative line, and it's giving him a huge amount of momentum and clearance for the guys, but he goes a bit wide onto the grass as does Hellcat, but Hellcat spins out and there's been major contact there, but he's bounced off of the drivers around him as we're seeing drivers into the wall. Insubordinate install. Lewis passes through all the carnage. What on earth has happened here as the Portuguese is up into P4? But we've seen 3 drivers literally all off in the space of a couple of corners. A half-second penalty for track limits at turn 4 for Lewis. And meanwhile, up front, Supremo breaking away already as we see Phil Deadly also into the wall here. He's gone very deep into the wall and none of the drivers around him are stopping for him. So I think Phil has made a mistake. But we are definitely going to see what happened at the start of the race there once again very shortly for you, ladies and gentlemen, because that was a shocker. But meanwhile, we can see that Speaky Biltong from P7 to P4 in the space of only 2 sectors and making his way all the way out the field in very quick succession. And further back, Insubordinate now finds himself behind the Brit of Hellcat, and we know Hellcat is a very smart, consistent driver. He's not too defensive, but instead he tries to use cutback lines to his advantage, and the American will be very wary of that as he tries to look for the move on the outside to inside, well, so the inside to outside I should say, and he switches back to the inside. A good dummy there by Insubordinate to make Hellcat think he was going to take the racing line, but Hellcat comes back at him as Insubordinate goes way too deep through the corner there, and Phil Deadly makes the move on Tamet all the same through turn number 12. And Hellcat holds on right now, so really creative driving from the Britishman as they make their way out of the final corner then. Right now it is Supremo T leading as he comes down the start-finish straight to complete lap number 1 and come on to lap number 2. So Supremo T leading, followed by Heedless in P2. Then it's Lewis in P3, Speaky Biltong in P4. The gap opened up between the battle for P3 and the battle for P1. Hellcat right now coming out the final corner, leading the battle for P5 as we see Insubordinate come into the pits immediately. The American driver going for a pit stop, and then we can see behind Phil Deadly continue on his way, and Tamer also into the pits here. And do either of these 2 drivers take a new set of tyres on? We will find out very shortly for you folks. Insubordinate's into the pits. Does he go for the tyre change? He does not. What about Tamer? Does he go for the tyre change as well? So Insubordinate's going to the end on the same set of tyres. Neither of them change their tyres and they make their way out. This is going to be a gamble, but of course they will have the clear track available to them right now. As we see up front, the gap between our leaders is only 1 second, and it is coming down a little bit. Heedless literally going full attack right now. I think the Scotsman realises he needs to get the pressure on the Mexican before the midway point of the race. The Mexican just seems to have it in the opening stages and then falls back when he knows he's got a gap to play with. And Supremo gets it very wrong, in fact, through turn number 9 there. He goes way too deep and actually has to cut off half the corner there under braking, and it means Heedless is going to be the closest he's ever been. They make their way out towards turn 12. Will we see a move from the score? He's on the inside, Supremo on the outside, but he's not close enough to go for the move. Is Heedless. He just can't get it there, but the Mexican gives him the space, going for the launch line out of the turn 12 hairpin, and this is going to be some daring stuff as we see the rear view camera shot. Lewis, who's moved his way up into P3, goes a little bit wide, but he's still clear of Speaky Biltong, and our leaders settle back into an order as they make their way through turn 14, and you can see how much Heedless is trying to mount the pressure on right now on Supremo, knowing that he's got to get the job done as soon as possible if he wants to be in that striking spot come the end of the race. He needs to keep that gap as tight as possible and just keep putting in those solid laps. He can't afford for the Mexican to break away. As you can see, Supremo doing a little bit of a shake there, just simply feeling a little bit of an itch, I feel, and I think Heedless is trying to make that itch even worse as they go on to the next lap, as we see Lewis right now setting the fastest lap of anyone on lap number 2 at 49.7, but we suspect there's going to be much faster laps before the end of this race, that I'm sure, as Hellcat continues on his merry way in P5 right now. And let's take a look back at what happened at the start of the race, that massive incident. So we're riding on board with what will be a Lewis here. We're actually going to see it from our rear driver. They all make their way through the corner. He overtakes Spinky there, and you're going to see he disappears. Tamer's ahead, and there's a little bit of contact here as we see the Brit of Hellcat goes wide and crashing off. And it's Tamer and it's Sport. When Sport went off there, and Tamer got caught in that and went charging off the circuit. And that's how it all kicked off. And then Lewis just simply made the mistake, but kept it together. So that's how we saw the three drivers all going all over the place. As Lewis is, oh my goodness, I literally look at Lewis for 1 second in the replay, and he's gone into the wall at turn number 5, and that's what we saw earlier on for the Portuguese. He's fallen down the order, and Spinky now is up into P3, and Hellcat is in P4. As meanwhile, that battle for the race lead right now, we can see that Heedless dropping off a little bit versus Supremo, and this is where Supremo opens it up. He just has that edge on the opening half of the race. We've said it time and time again that Heedless has got to come at him strong, and he just can't get enough in the tank right now in terms of lap time to get that gap down. Because as soon as he gets that gap down to about a second, that's where Heedless comes live and Supremo starts to feel some pressure. But meanwhile, further back, we can see that Lewis, after making that mistake, is hunting after Hellcat, who has inherited P4 because of that mistake. And you can see that Hellcat right now, just again, driving the most consistent race he can and not really fighting too much. And they're going to go side by side down into turn 13. Hellcat tries to cut him behind, but gets a little bit of contact there, turning into the Portuguese. And the Portuguese goes through the corner and gets it nailed very well. And Hellcat backs out of it, realising there's another day to come back in the hunt for P4, as we see Phil Deadly, the Irishman in P6 right now, watches on and tries to find a way past the Brit ahead of him as they make their way out of the final corner and up onto the next lap. And we see meanwhile up front that our two leaders are pulling away from the rest of the field, and Heedless has backed off the wick a little bit now, as we see Spinky is 2.4 seconds down on the Scotsman. The two teammates, of course, in P2 and P3, they'll be loving this and hoping that one of them can grab the race win as well. Spinky goes very sideways through 3 and has to catch it through 4. Now, meanwhile, as we look further around, we can see that Lewis in P4 right now, making his way clear of Hellcat, who gets a good run out of the first corner, but he's feeling a lot of pressure from Phil right now as they make their way up the hill. Mr. Deadly, the Irishman, getting ever closer to the back of the Brit's car here as they come through turn 5, up the hill to turn 6 they go. Will Phil try to go for a deep move here? Will he try and go as deep as humanly possible and then get the run down in towards turn 8? Phil goes to that deep line initially, but I think he then thinks about trying to cut back and staying in the slipstream of Hellcat, who gets it very sideways. There's contact there. Phil can't get himself clear of Hellcat's car, so that stops his momentum here, but you can see that the Irishman is feeling more composed at this point in the race and is feeling very competitive to go hunting after P5. Now, of course, they won't want to essentially fight one another too much as, hold on a second, what on earth is happened to Phil? I look away for a second and Phil has just disappeared. Did he miss his braking point? So as we ride on board with Phil here, I think he's just simply missed his braking point into the corner because he comes down. Does he ride onto the curb or onto the grass? Completely missed his braking point, did the Irishman there, and fortunately for him that's not major damage. We do not have heavy damage on, we only have, I think it's minor damage if that, so as a result that means that Phil is able to carry on his way, but that is a disaster for the Irishman, who is getting ready to strike on Hellcat, I think. But meanwhile up front we can see that the lead has opened up to 3.6 seconds. Heedless chasing after Supremo T, but there's just no way, I think, at this point that Heedless is going to be able to get in there. I think it's all going to come down to the pit stops, who decides to take on tyres and who does not, as we can see that Spinky Biltong is now starting to close up on his teammate, the gap having dropped from lap number 4's 2.4 seconds down to 1.9 seconds, half a second taken out of Heedless by his teammate over the course of lap number 4. But as they continue their way up the hill then on lap number 5, making their way towards turn number 6 for the 5th time of asking, the question will be, of course, when can we expect the pit stops from our leaders right now? And to give you a quick recap in terms of who's pitted and who's not, our top 3 have not pitted, nor has our 4th place man of Lewis. Hellcat hasn't pitted either, nor has Phil Deadly. Our first 2 drivers to pit were Insubordinate and Tamer, running in P7 and P8 right now. And both of these drivers opted not to change the tyres. And you can see as a result of them not changing their tyres that their tyres are in relatively good state right now, albeit they've got a little bit of graining starting to show on the rear right hand tyre. We'd expect that because this circuit is effectively anti-clockwise, which means it's got more left-handers than right-handers, and also the fact that we are looking at a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, so the power's being shot through the rear wheels, and also the rear end rotates more than the front end typically under braking. But meanwhile, looking up front, we can see that Spinky definitely falling a little bit back from his teammate now, and I think these two maybe just settling into the order right now and thinking to themselves, right, we can't get the win, but let's make sure we get the P2 and P3 and be the strongest team of everybody in terms of finishing positions tonight. Because if they can do that, then they set themselves nicely up for the Drivers' Championship in round number 2, and they give themselves the best possible advantage in the Constructors' Championship. As we see our race leader come into the pit from first place, it is Supremo T who comes in, and Heedless continues on his way, as does Spinky. Now, do the two drivers here decide to split their strategies and try to box Supremo in at some point? That will be a question for them, of course, as Lewis comes out the final corner. He doesn't pit, and Supremo, did he go for a pit for a tyre change? He did not go for a tyre change, and it's a good thing he didn't, because I think he would have been at risk there of Lewis getting in his way. So Supremo opting not to change tyres, and looking further back, Lewis continues, as Hellcat is now feeling pressure once again from the Irishman of Phil Deadly. And will Hellcat go defensive? He decides not to. Phil goes for the lunge on the inside into turn number 1. Not really a lunge, in fact, just goes for the move, I should really say. And as he comes through the corner here, Hellcat goes to the cutback, and he switches back across the rear end of Phil. Nicely timed that, but Phil has got the momentum. He has nailed turn number 1 this time, and now as they make their way all the way up the hill here, you can see that Hellcat having a lot of difficulty in running in the dirty air of the KTM in front of him, and as a result Hellcat having to get it under control rapidly. Nice catch though by the British driver there, and it means he carries on his way in 6th place, but is well off the back of Phil Deadly now, as we're on lap number 6, and Hellcat takes us through turn number 6. Now, meanwhile, looking further around, we can see Insubordinate in P7 right now, and remember, Insubordinate having pitted earlier on, he is chasing after track position in terms of the strategy game right now. And to give you an idea of the time loss with regards to that pit stop not taking a tyre change, given the fact that Supremo T was 4 seconds ahead of Heedless when he came into the pit, and now he is 10 seconds behind, well, let's say 10.5 seconds when he came out, that means the pit time loss is approximately 14 to 15 seconds based on no tyre change. So that is the delta that our drivers are having to work with right now if they don't change tyres. If they change tyres, you can add a further 4 seconds onto that, and that's an 18-second time loss by comparison. So that's the story in terms of pit stops, but Supremo is definitely hunting down our leaders as Spinky comes into the pit, which will release Supremo back into P2. And will it have been enough from the British driver there to make sure that Lewis does not get in the way? I do not think so. In fact, as Lewis comes across the timing line right now, having not pitted yet, and we're going to see that Spinky goes for the tyre change here, so he's going for the longer game and going for those fresh tyres right at the end, as Phil Deadly also comes into the pits. But Lewis no regrets right now, our P3 driver, the Portuguese, carrying on his way in P3. No, and he's still got to do that pit stop and going for the long game here and using that clear air to his advantage, as Phil Deadly goes for a tyre change here, and that's going to drop him behind Insubordinate. He's also putting fuel in the car, which I think is a bit of a mistake there by the Irishman. I think he forgot to cancel that, and that means he'll come back out in P7, but of course he's lost the place to Insubordinate, who by pitting early and not taking those tyres is now 5.1 seconds up the road. But of course, towards the end of the race, the Americans' tyres are going to wear off and the Irishman's tyres will be coming into their prime. So that is the gamble that Insubordinate has played. Will it pay off? Only time will tell, as Tamer looks on in P8 right now, 2.2 seconds down on Phil Deadly, who we'd expect will break away from the Egyptian, given the fact he's got fresher tyres by comparison with Tamer's 7-lap-old tyres right now. But meanwhile, as we look towards our leader, we can see that gap between Heedless and Supremo has come down to 8.6 seconds. And I think the Scots driver here just recognises the fact that Supremo will need to make a mistake, or Heedless has got to somehow pull pace out of nowhere, because otherwise it is the win given to Supremo right now. As Lewis comes along down through sector number 4, into sector number 4 I should say, and the Portuguese doing a solid job running a really solid pace right now. In fact, he won't be in the hunt for the podium, we don't think, but he's still got a very good chance of coming in P4, given the fact that Spinky is 6 seconds down the road from him. Spinky in a very comfortable position, as we see all of our drivers making their way around to complete lap number 7, and Heedless continues out on circuit. And Lewis really started to kick up the gear in terms of pace, and I think what Lewis is effectively doing here, as we see Supremo sets the fastest lap of 48.3, I think Lewis is trying to match his pace to the Mexican in front of him and actually just settling down into this one and not making any mistakes right now, because the Portuguese is pushing and really building his stride. To give you an idea, that last lap was a 49.3. It was the second off of our leader in terms of our race leader's pace, but it's still a good lap. As Hellcat comes into the pits from P5, and this is going to drop him down the order. As we see, Insubordinate comes across into P5, so this strategy really working out for the American. Phil Deadly is also going to come through, and what about Tamer, who is catching up to Phil Deadly? Well, Hellcat is going to come out behind them, and he chose to go for a fresh set of tyres here, so it will definitely be the case that Hellcat has now got it all to do on the final 4 laps of this race, chasing after all the guys ahead of him who are on older tyres by comparison with his own. But Hellcat will go for it here, and of course mistakes can be made by anyone at this point. As he comes up the hill now towards turn number 6, going through 2, 3 and then 4 and 5, and just getting back into the swing of things. Of course, cold tyres will need a lap to embed, but once he's got them warmed up, then it's better off said that he goes charging after the head of the pack in front of him. But as they make their way around right now, you can see that Heedless, meanwhile, doing a very good job of just keeping those laps together. He's not got the ability to keep that gap open. It is still coming down between himself and the second place man, our race leader, effectively assuming that all happens well with the pit stop. With Supremo right now is going to be inheriting the lead when Heedless pits. The gap is 8.2 seconds. It's oscillating but slowly coming down, and Heedless continues out there. I think he's going to go all the way to the end in terms of when he can pit for the mandatory pit stop, and that will be the end of lap 10 as he goes on to lap number 9, and you can see that gap is coming down by approximately half a second a lap right now, if not a little bit more, and that means the Mexican will be feeling very comfortable here that he's just gradually eroding Heedless's chances of winning and making sure he can pick up the triple tonight. As we see right now, Lewis in P3 doing everything he needs to hold on to that P3, but again, remember, this is P3 out of the circuit, but Lewis has yet to pit, and Spinky will inherit that P3 as far as we're aware. But the big question mark will be over in Subordinate, who is effectively right now 25 seconds down on Lewis, and I think Lewis has done enough to get himself up into P4. But we'll wait and find out as we see further back that Phil Deadly in P6. He's got away from Tamer, who was closing up to him, to be fair. I think Tamer's had a little bit of an off somewhere because he's dropped to 6 seconds down on our P6 man. Pardon me. And our P8 driver of Hellcat right now on those fresher tyres, making his way around and trying to do his utmost here to get himself off of last place and gain 1 or 2 positions come the end of it as he makes his way through the uphill sequence once again. Now, of course, hopping back to our race leaders, can we expect a pit stop from Heedless here? I don't reckon it'll be this lap. I reckon it'll be the final lap, but you could see just how much time Supremo is stripping out of Heedless now. To give you an idea, on the last lap alone, Heedless did a 150.2, whereas his rival here did a 149.8, so that was 4 attempts. But on this lap, that gap has come down already by almost a second and a half by comparison, and I think Heedless is really starting to hit the cliff of his tyre life, and it's just not working out for him as he comes into the pits from the race lead, and that is going to give the race lead back to Supremo T, and I think now it's a case for Supremo T. If he wants this, he's got it. It's his to lose as well. As well as that, Spinky right now in P3, his teammate does not go for the tyre change, and so the 2 teammates, the Scot and the Brit, will be making their way up towards turn 1 as we see Lewis comes into the pits. Now this will be critical. Lewis had a gap of 17.5 seconds to Insubordinate after, I think, making a small mistake somewhere. Will Lewis come out ahead of Insubordinate, or will Insubordinate inherit P4? It's going to be very close. Lewis is into his pit box and he does not go for the tyre change here, so the Portuguese is going to come out, and as we pan the camera around here, you're going to see at the rear of your camera shot, there is Insubordinate right now, and he's not close enough. So Lewis here, if he can now 2 more laps, the Portuguese will have pulled a stunner over Insubordinate and come home in P4. But of course, Insubordinate will be aware of that, and he will know that Lewis is prone to mistakes, and he'll try and put as much pressure on the Portuguese as possible, will the American, as they go charging up the hill once again. 2 laps to go. Who is going to be bringing home that P4 come the end of it? It's your guess right now. I think Lewis is in a strong position to do so, but he's just got to keep it consistent. And Phil Deadly will be hunting after the pair of them. He's only 2.7 seconds down in Subordinate and a further 2.5 seconds down on Lewis right now. So 5 seconds is the gap, and anything can happen with 1.5 laps remaining as they make their way through turn 6. But our race leader right now, Supremo T, has led this very nicely and managed it on the strategy well. And I think Heedless, with the gap opening up now to 8.5 seconds and continue to open up, I think Heedless will be turning the wick down just a little bit, and his teammate Spinky behind him will just be settling into the formation, and they'll be pleased with a P2 and a P3 as Heedless goes charging out to turn 14 and almost gets it very wrong there, Heedless. He doesn't need to push it anymore. He just needs to keep it safe and consistent. You can see here the time this is kicking in here, and I think mistakes are starting to creep in on the periphery because he lost a second almost there to his teammate, and Spinky will be looking at this and thinking he might be able to pip his teammate to result, which of course Heedless will not want because he'll be chased after Supremo in the championship come the end of round number 1. But it is going to be very, very close as Lewis makes his way out the final corner. And of course, Insubordinate here hunting down Lewis. And, well, Insubordinate going a little bit wide and getting caught on the exit curve there. The car getting hooked over the exit of turn 15. And it's not fatal this time, but Insubordinate will be aware of this as they're all going on to that final lap right now. And Phil Deadly will be chased after this and hoping that Insubordinate makes one more major mistake. As Tamir in the rearview camera shot there, we're focusing on him now. The Egyptian makes his way. He's in P7. He's got Hellcat chasing after him, only 2 seconds down as they go on to their final lap. But meanwhile, in the battle for P2, we can see that Heedless is definitely turning that wick down because Spinky is chasing after him and closing up. But I don't think that Spinky's going to be close enough here. Heedless does not need to push this anymore. He just needs to bring that car home. And his teammate as well, the two teammates won't want to take one another out here, as we see that there's been a bit of an incident coming out of turn 1, and it is Hellcat who in the end went into the wall on exit. And is this a run over the curb there coming out of the corner? I think it is going to be a curb mistake. He goes wide onto the grass and the car gets sent to the wall. But as he makes his way down the hill out of turn 14 right now, he's won the first 2 races. He's strategically played race number 3, and it is going to be as he comes through the final corner on his debut in GTSRL EU Division 3, Season 39, 3 wins out of 3 in round number 1 for Supremo T from Mexico, as he weaves his way across the line here to take the checkered flag by a sizable margin. A brilliant, well done race to the Mexican, as we see Heedless coming out the final corner, his teammate racing after him. The two teammates, they come across in formation, P2 and P3 to Heedless and Spinky. They'll be pleased with that result for the constructors, and then it will be Lewis in the end, the Portuguese, who after having a dire first 2 races full of mistakes, doesn't get it wrong this time at the 3rd time of attempt, and he's going to come across the line in P4. The Portuguese doing a solid job here, making his way across the line to complete his race. Phil Deadly, the Irishman, building his momentum over the course of tonight's races. A P5, he'll be chuffed with that one. And then it will be P6 for Insubordinate, who in the end, I think has actually made a major error because Phil Deadly wasn't there at that point in time in P5. So Insubordinate in the end, making a mistake to drop to P6. Tamir and P7, the Egyptian, falling back down the order in race number 3. And then last but not least, having made that mistake at the start of the final lap, it will be Hellcat, the British driver, who takes the final place in tonight's race number 3. As he makes his way across the timing line right now, congratulations to all of our drivers, of course, but to our triple winner tonight, Supremo T from Mexico. He's made it 3 out of 3. Well, as always, we take a quick save of the replay and then we take a look at those race results. Subject to any stewards' inquiries, of course, here are your results from race number 3. Supremo T winning by 10.7 seconds over Heedless, the Scotsman, leading his team home with Spinky, his teammate, immediately behind him. The window between the two of them being a 10th. And our top 5 being rounded out by Lewis with that solid result there for the Portuguese of P4 and Phil Deadly, the Irishman, picking up a P5. The fastest lap being a 48.331. The fastest lap I believe we have seen all evening as set by the Mexican, our winner, on lap number 7. As we see some other individuals now popping in for King of the Karts. And we're going to take a very quick sip of water. And in terms of our driver of the day tonight, I mean, there were plenty of performances up and down the field, but I really do think the driver of the day tonight has to go to our triple winner of Supremo T, dominating this from start to finish and pulling out some absolutely fantastic stops, where it being qualifying or the race. But a special mention should go to the driver who's just left the lobby, and that is the Egyptian of Tamer 2010, who picked up his first ever podium in GTSRL, and he'll be surprised at that, picking it up where everybody else was making mistakes around him. But of course, that's what it takes sometimes. You don't need to be the fastest driver on circuit, you just need to be the most consistent one, not making the mistakes, and he will be very, very pleased with that result, I'm sure. As we make sure to flip the camera back quickly. And we have indeed got our camera working. And it'll be time for King of the Karts very shortly, as everyone's been asked to ready up. Got to be braver there into turn 6 of this car. Oh, hello, grass. Whee! He literally just gets sent all over the place with this grass. And like that, my karting career was ended. As there we go, we've got King of the Karts, EU Division 3. Let's get to it. It's where we started. I think I'm starting right at the back, as is custom. No, P9 this time. Jerry Ardro and Vitor Knight jumping in the lobby. Good to see the pair of the EU drivers there. Vitor being Division 1 and Jerry being Division 2 for this season. Couple of jump starts there for some drivers, I think. Well, that was a good run. Oh, that's a wall. Get off the flipping wall. They're made out of glue. We've got 2 laps tonight rather than 1. Oh, Vitor, no. Oh, no. Come on, Jerry, let's break away from the field. Let's break away. Let's not fight too much. Let's run. I think Jerry's going to go for the move. But he said hello to the wall. Right, I've got to run away with this. I've got another lap. I've just got to run. They're going to have the boost. They're going to have that slipstream. They are going to catch up. Yeah, Jerry's already caught up, unfortunately. This little cart's not fast enough. Jerry, just give me the push right now. It's going to be between the two of us, I think, for the win here. But he's going to have the slipstream coming out the final corner, I've just remembered. I think we're going to nip him. Come on. Come on. Yes. Oh, that was brilliant, Jerry. That was close. Don't think you could have a King of the Karts closer than that. Or cleaner than that. That was a good race, mate. But we take those. Alrighty then, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that is your King of the Karts for tonight. And taking a look at the race results there. So we came home with the win, only literally half a tenth over Jerry R. Driver. A brilliant battle to end on. Pies picking off the podium there with P3. Supremo T in P4 and Heedless in P5. The fastest lap going to Lewis there on the second lap of 51.998. But that has been EU Division 3 round number 1, and that completes this week's set of round 1 races for season 39. But be sure to come back next Monday, where it's my expectation that Frog will be casting EU Division 1 at the same time, 7:30 round to 9:30 in the evening, and then I'll be back to do EU Division 2 and Division 3 on the Tuesday and Wednesday. But until then, stay safe, stay smiling, stay positive, and remember to stay on track. Good night.